A couple of years ago, Lumix decided they wanted to play God and reanimate the corpse of one of the most beloved Micro Four Thirds cameras.
It's alive!
While we eagerly awaited the idea of a compact version of the G9 II in the form of a GX9 II, instead Panasonic messed up their reanimation process and created this. The GM1? 2? No, this is the Lumix S9. While the GM1 has remained a cult classic, especially when paired with the iconic 20mm f1.7, the S9 has been missing that magic lens to finally make it make sense. Meet the Lumix 40mm f2. But how does this new compact setup actually compare with the cult classic? And are we staring at a new future classic? Before we look at the Lumix S9 and this new 40mm f2, which I've had on loan from Lumix for a couple of weeks, I first want to refresh your memory of the joy of the Lumix GM1 and all that it has to offer. It's true what they say, that a camera is only as small as its lenses, and that's where the GM1 collided beautifully with the Micro Four Thirds lens mount. The GM1 itself is remarkably small, but somehow still quite comfortable to shoot with. It's missing a fair few features like dedicated rear or front dials on the body, or any in-body image stabilization, or even a cold or hot shoe for mounting external accessories. It does still come with a pop-up flash and a great touchscreen, which is saying a lot considering what Sony and other brands were making at this point in 2013 when the Lumix GM1 was actually released. It has a 16-megapixel 4/3 sensor and fast autofocus when paired with fast focusing Micro Four Thirds mount lenses. But for the purposes of this video, we're using a slightly slower lens for this comparison. In this video, we'll be pairing the Lumix GM1 with the 20mm f1.7, which is definitely a bottleneck in terms of speed when shooting on the GM1. The difference is really night and day between shooting on the 20mm and the 14mm f2.5, which is very quick focusing. So when we compare the GM1 and 20mm with the new S9 and 40mm, the differences should be pretty obvious, right? Of course, when it comes to photography, the Lumix S9 does not have a mechanical shutter. So if we're going to compare this camera to the GM1, which does have a mechanical shutter, that feels a little bit unfair. But luckily, or unluckily for me, my GM1's mechanical shutter has stopped working. So this is actually going to be much more of a fair fight. We have two Lumix-made, compact, everyday cameras with 40mm equivalent lens for street photography, for an afternoon of street photography in London. Yes, I'm no longer in London right now, I'm in Istanbul, but I did shoot all these images just before we flew out here. But first, a word from our sponsor, Ugreen. You may have seen recently that I was organising my images into collections and themes. Well, until now, I've been doing all of this using a single cloud storage service plus an old SSD. And while I do my best to keep things organised and backed up, I definitely let things slip and it makes me quite nervous. While travelling, I've just been on a one SSD and cloud backup workflow, but looking forward to when I'm in one place again, it's time to make a change. And that's why I'll be using this Ugreen NASync DXP 4800 Pro in my future setup. And a big thank you to Ugreen for sending me this NAS while I was briefly back in the UK. I'll be continuing to use this when I come back later this year, so it's nice to get a head start. I've always wanted to try a NAS system since I was a PC builder a few years ago, but the multiple drives, power supplies, and cables seemed like a lot of faff. So I was surprised when I realized just how easy this setup is to use and to get started. The hardware feels premium and looks fantastic on my very temporary desk here. Setting up the drives was incredibly simple. With the provided locking key, you open each bay by pushing this button, sliding out the empty bay, then placing in one of the provided drives. In my case, I have 4 of these 4TB SATA drives. These clamp into the bays without the need for additional tools. Then just slide the bay back in and repeat for the other 3 drives. It's so simple that I feel a bit stupid for being hesitant to try a NAS system earlier. On the back of the NAS, you'll find a magnetic dust filter to help keep the internals clean. You can pop this off for any cleaning that you need to do. And along with the 4 SATA bays that I've used here, there are also 2 M.2 NVMe SSD slots, which give you a total potential capacity of 144 terabytes. When you arrange these drives into a RAID 5 storage pool, Your data is protected even if a drive fails. This is all powered by a 13th gen Intel Core i3 processor with DDR5 memory to keep things moving quickly. When it comes to the speeds, you have the choice of a 10 gigabit Ethernet port, which can deliver speeds of up to 1.25 gigabytes per second, or a 2.5 gigabit port for standard home setups. These speeds mean I can edit my RAW files directly off the NAS in Lightroom without any lag. I can browse quickly, zoom, and apply presets just like I'm working from my local drive. Plus, you can access, search, and organize your NAS files even when away from your home network. You can even do this from your smartphone. It's just like having your own personal cloud storage on the go. Since getting set up, I've really enjoyed using the AI Album Assistant for organizing my files, which is a bit different to the usual AI because this model runs locally on the NAS. I can use the AI Assistant to search all of my files using normal language. I can search for things like dogs, flowers, or blue and yellow, and it pulls all the files I need. You can check out the Ugreen DXP 4800 Pro at the link in the description below. Thanks again to Ugreen for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's get back to comparing these Lumix cameras. Throughout my day of shooting with both of these cameras in London, I was partially shooting some side-by-side comparisons for you to see, and also some dedicated time with one camera, then switching to the other, to get more of a realistic, everyday use case comparison. And honestly, I was shocked which I felt performed better, especially considering the specs. It may be that I've had more time with the GM1 and 20mm historically, but I was much happier with the images I managed to get on this particular setup. Even though the 20mm is old and slow, I already know when and how to pre-focus at a distance with this lens when a scene is moving quickly. Sadly though, without the mechanical shutter now, I do need to be way more careful when shooting faster moving scenes on the GM1. But after some trial and error, I can spot the shots where the rolling shutter will be less of an issue to hopefully avoid too much jello artifacting in my images. The S9 on the other hand, autofocus is certainly not an issue with this new 40mm lens. The response is quick and the phase detect autofocus does a brilliant job of finding subjects when just set to the wide area. So I don't really need to pre-focus on this camera the same way that I do on the GM1. I was also having a lot of fun shooting with the f2 aperture on a full frame camera, which we'll touch more on a little bit later. However, I realised how much more I prefer shooting with the 4:3 aspect ratio of the GM1 when I was shooting these side-by-side images. Of course, you can set a 4:3 crop on a full frame camera, but I just like the kind of standard out-of-the-box feel of a Micro Four Thirds mount system having this 4:3 aspect ratio. It makes for really nice composed street scenes. In terms of the shooting experience between these two cameras, I would have thought for sure that the S9 would be miles ahead just in terms of modern features, but I was surprised how small the differences actually felt, considering like the 11-year age gap between these two cameras. Both produce lovely images with accurate colours for their respective systems. You might think that megapixels is going to make a big difference here, but if you're looking at these images on YouTube or on Instagram or anywhere online really, you're not going to notice much of a difference unless you're zooming in on the original file. I was really enjoying shooting some images like this with my focus on the London cityscape, then blurred foreground subjects. This is something that I really like to do with any camera system. And I thought this is a nice way to see the differences in depth of field between this full frame f2 lens and the f1.7 Micro Four Thirds lens, which has a full frame depth of field equivalent to f3.4. Even when shooting the same background at the same distance from the same spot, with the same distance to the foreground subjects roughly, I don't think the depth of field separation from the full frame makes a massive difference in terms of everyday shooting. For me personally, even if I'm shooting on a full frame camera with a fast aperture lens like an f2.8 or even f1.8, I often close down my aperture to something like 3.5, 5.6 or even f8 in the majority of situations. I don't really like a completely blurred out background or a completely blurred out foreground, even if I have the option to do that. I think having a fast aperture is most useful or in super low light situations on a full frame camera, but when it comes to actual day-to-day shooting, I think the differences between what a Micro Four Thirds mount camera like the GM1 can do and what a full frame camera like the S9 can do are pretty minimal. It's really down to actually if you need to take advantage of the larger sensor and the large aperture in low light shooting, where I think this makes the biggest difference. There was a boring comparison that I tried to do here, and that is this rolling shutter comparison. I tried a few real world scenarios to get the worst rolling shutter using cyclists in London, but neither camera was performing so badly that I could really say one was definitively worse than the other. I'd already compared the S9's rolling shutter with the GX80 some time ago in a much more controlled environment, as you can see here. On a mathematical level, the S9 has a readout speed of 1/40th of a second. So even if you're to shoot at 1,000th of a second, the sensor needs 1/40th of a second to capture the entire frame. That's where faster pans like this example can lead to rolling shutter effects. The GM1, on the other hand, is much slower. This has readout speeds of 1/15th to 1/20th of a second, so this is why you need to be much more careful with how you shoot with something like the GM1 to account for any wobble, pans, or fast subject movement. So when it comes to the electronic shutter performance between these two cameras, it shouldn't be a surprise that the S9 performs significantly better. But is that enough of a reason to actually spend the extra money on a full frame, hybrid, more video focused camera like the S9 compared to something like the GM1 or other micro four thirds mount cameras? The GM1 definitely isn't the best option out there, and I wouldn't even say it's the best value option considering the price it can go for these days. When it comes to pure value, all-round specs, IBIS, a solid mechanical shutter, there's really only one alternative from Lumix, and it's the camera in this video here. I've shot with this camera a couple of times, and I even bought it twice. Find out why.